Hello! Welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega, Mitch J, Trick Slattery, and David Joseph. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the God and universe thing because, we understand that we don't have a free will. And so for some people, this raises the question how, if we're not the author of what we say, feel, think, or do, then we think, well, what is the author? Who is it up to? Or what is it up to, if anything? And so I'm going to turn it over to George so he can explain how he views this particular thing because it's a little bit interesting.
All right, so like basically we started with the premise that not only is nothing up to us as human beings, nothing is up to anything, like rocks, particles or anything. I mean, we have these laws of nature that govern everything. So, like if things aren't up to us, what is everything up to? And again, to better understand the nature of the exploration, I think we have to go back to when religions, I think, were first formed, before they were organized, before they had a liturgy and a literature. Back then, people were trying to figure out why things happened. So, like back with the Greeks, for example, they ultimately came up with the idea of these gods that, they're basically like, I mean, they're these powers, the power over thunder, power over whatever it is. And, it made sense. It was just a way of labeling, what causes things to happen. And then, like, ultimately, like through logic, they came up with the monotheistic understanding, well, that if you have, like, let's say a pantheon of gods, just like in physics, if there have to be fundamental forces that control the like chemical reactions and stuff, so with what controls reality, if there's a pantheon of gods, there has to logically be a governing kind of like entity, governing God. So that I think is the understanding of God that we I think need to start with, and it's the understanding, I think, that religions, the five major religions, not so much Buddhism, but certainly starting with Hinduism, started with just this idea that there is, like, a God that governs everything, that this being, this entity that determines everything that's happening. So the idea, it doesn't seem like we can evade that understanding. There's like, this is, of course, this is like related to the theist pantheist debate. Like, while I have argued and will continue to argue for an acutheist view, that, like, fine, they've got some things about God right, just like we got some things about the universe right, let's say in the 1800s, that we got a lot wrong. So it's not a matter of whether God exists or not. Um, it's a matter of how do we describe, God per se. So, all right, so let me open it up.
Um, okay, well, first of all, I think this will be interesting to anyone who listens to our podcast who is religious because you have different people of different religions. Some believe in one God, some believe in many gods, and of course, others believe in no gods. And so I think the first thing to discuss is, well, what is a god? Like, what is the definition of a god before you can say how many there are or not?
Right, and if you go, Chandler, with how the concept of a monotheistic God developed, then I think it's easy to understand. Basically, like the gods, the pantheon of Greek gods, the gods, in other religions or other societies, they were most essentially what explains why something happens. There might have been, like, for example, if people believe there's justice in the world, when there's a God of justice. If people believe there's mercy, there's a God of mercy. If there's rain, there's a God of rain. If there's wind, there's a God of wind. So I think that's the most fundamental and basic understanding of the meaning of God. It simply explains why things happen, just like we apply it to like free will or anything that happens in nature.
How do
So,
you?
oh,
Sorry.
yeah. So, George, what you're saying is basically people are looking for a cause, an explanation for something that they see happening, and sometimes that leads them to the idea of something that's sometimes called a god that they attribute the cause to.
Right, essentially, the God, by its fundamental definition, its initial definition is right. What causes everything to happen as it does?
But I think like at that time, gods were more anthropomorphized as well. So we had these conscious deities that thought about things and made decisions for people, which doesn't really equate to the type of, I guess, pantheist god that's just uh, equals the universe or nature or something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right how it developed in the Greek mythology, but I would guess that before that, I'm not sure they actually connected, God with being a physical being, like in our image, whatever. But so like that would be an instance of, but still, all right. So you kind of like take away, right? God doesn't seem it seems very unlikely that God has a human form, whatever. So again, so like just like for example in the 1900s we believed that the universe, there was a steady state theory of the universe, that the universe is always the way it is and there was no expansion. So it's not like that the universe didn't exist because they didn't get it completely right. It's just that our understanding of the universe over the last several centuries has evolved, has improved.
Yeah. But my problem with the word God, I guess, is just that it carries so much of the religious baggage with it. Like, even like we can convert God to your type of version of God, and that's a rational God. It's a God that exists because it's just saying God is the universe, and that's perfectly fine. If you say God is the universe, or God is nature, or God is the laws of physics, or things like that, then obviously that God exists. But the problem is when you tell people that God exists, and me and Mitch, I think, are going to have the same opinion here. Mitch can correct me if I'm wrong, but
You know me too well.
but yeah, so we kind of reject the notion of that word because we think that it'll confuse other people if we use that word because there's so much religious baggage to it.
All right, but let's say we took that argument and we applied it to the debate over free will. In a certain
Right.
sense, that what the argument could be, well, so many people equate free will with freedom of speech and with like a person kind of like coercing a person. So in other words, because it's so misunderstood, we shouldn't use it. So like in other words,
Correct.
like just how we have to, I think, defend the integrity of free will as Augustine coined it, as it's been debated over the centuries. I think we have to defend the integrity of the concept of God as it originally developed.
Well,
Uh,
well,
yeah,
yeah. So
I see a
okay.
non sequitur there. That doesn't finish your thought, Trick, please. I'm
I
sorry.
did.
No, Trick, you're saying something.
Okay. Yeah. So how the notion of God originated? Don't see how. Like I don't think people. I think people actually thought that God was a conscious deity, or the gods were conscious creatures or deities, or they weren't something that didn't think, or they weren't something that didn't not think. I guess is the way to put it. So that's the problem here. Is people? I mean, even the origination of the word God, I don't think ever started with something just them saying, "Oh, it's the universe." It started with them anthropomorphizing things such as the sun and things like that, and saying that there's these conscious thing that affects other things on Earth.
Yes. If I may, I'd like to make two quick points, just two very quick points. First of all, George, if what you said earlier, Neil deGrasse Tyson had a good line that sort of sums up the point you were making. He described religion as an ever receding pocket of of scientific ignorance. Secondly, I think you made a false comparison here. You connected God to free will. Well, we as people who reject free will do not want to use the word free will except to say that it doesn't exist. In a
Correct.
similar way, I do not want to use the word God except to say God doesn't exist.
All right, so Trick, let me. So basically, you're saying that God was originally conceived as a conscious God, an aware God. I'm not
Correct.
sure as God originally evolved or developed, that was part of it. In other words, like um, it rains, something is causing it to rain. It thunders. Something is causing it to thunder. I think that may have been the original what you would call it understanding. But then I would have to concede. I agree with you. Yes. Then I think it was tied into like the idea that like if we behave in a certain way, then the gods, God is going to
Right.
respond in a certain way. There's kind of like an interaction. But all right, given that, then we come back to this issue of free will that starts this exploration. Because again, this exploration starts from the idea that since we don't have a free will, how do we describe the nature of what is fundamentally our consciousness? Because it's not ours,
Right.
and that's where I think we have to like from a logical perspective, if our consciousness is not ours, then I think like we have to attribute it to what makes us conscious, what's responsible for every conscious thought we have. And again, that goes with the idea of like a the God that controls everything, controlling even our consciousness.
Yeah, but there's nothing that, well, from my atheistic perspective, there's nothing that controls anything. It's just things that happen causally. So everything just happens causally. It's kind of like billiard balls, clinging into each other, and then that creates this configuration that has consciousness, but nothing, mapped out the fact that there would be a conscious creature called the human in the future or anything like that.
Okay, well, I mean, we can see reality evolving, through a causal sequence, cause and effect, and all. But I mean, that's kind of like a process that applies to everything. But the other way we have to see reality, and this isn't so much philosophy or religion, but rather science, is that we accept that reality, our universe, is governed, is controlled by the laws of nature. Gravity, the weak and strong nuclear force, electromagnetism.
Right.
So in a certain sense, we can't escape this idea of fundamental control, and that's actually why Einstein and certain other pantheists would logically equate God with the universe, because of the idea of like being all powerful, seeming so to coincide with the idea of the laws of nature.
I want to talk about the Einstein thing first, as an example, because this is the problem that I see. Because Einstein, yeah, he probably would have called himself an atheist if he was around today. I would think, but that's besides the point. I think Einstein's version of God was basically just the universe, right? But look at all of the creationists that point to Einstein to say, well, Einstein believed in God to verify or to validify their own position. This is a problem to me because they're validifying a position that Einstein didn't really take, but Einstein did say the word of God. So we have kind of a problem there, and it's the same thing with compatibilism, and that's the why I have a problem with compatibilism, because it causes confusions when compatibilists use their redefinitions of free will, which are actually compatible and actually are make sense, but the problem is the word free will being attached to this other definition doesn't really address these other ideas and beliefs that people have about the free will that they actually possess. So it's the same problem. So it causes confusion. So when we use these words, we have to be very careful and not cause those confusions, or just say that they don't exist. And that's where I would take it to.
All right, so essentially you're saying that the God that Einstein described is fundamentally different than the God that the Bible describes. And while, I mean, for example, Spinoza was another pantheist who actually happened to believe that God was all good, that the universe is all good. And I have no idea how he came up with that reasoning because it seems simply wrong.
Right.
But if we take Einstein's conception, um, basically equating God with the universe also, I think, suggests the idea that God, as described in the Bible, is everything. That there's nothing that's not God. And so, like, again, this is another kind of like coinciding of the universe's definition as everything that exists with the biblical definition of God as everything that exists. So you have two very fundamental definitions of both the universe and God, being synonymous.
Well, that's just one qualifier. So you had, yeah. So the biblical version obviously has about 50 other qualifiers as well. Like, obviously they think there's a conscious deity. It's not just that it's everything, but if there's a conscious deity that thinks about things, that creates morality and all this stuff. So, uh,
Um, yeah, I have an interesting question. Now, George, are you making the case that the universe is the God of the Bible?
Um, yes, but the same way that I'm making the case that the universe today is the same universe that was described in the 1900s, that they didn't get completely correct. So in other words, like again, I'm advancing an acutheist perspective that most fundamentally the way you describe God and the universe is synonymous. So the Bible got a lot of, their description of God correct. They didn't get everything correct. Just like, when we came up with our conception of the universe, we didn't get everything right. It's still evolving.
Um, yeah. This is interesting because see, here my question, George, is now, like you say, the Bible got some things right and other things wrong, but like, how do we know which of those things are supposedly right and which of those things are wrong?
Well, I mean, the only way we can know any of this is like, fundamentally through logic. So in other words, like if God is defined as what controls everything, what makes everything happen, then certainly the laws of nature make everything happen. And we kind of like these things are kind of like axiomatic. They seem self-evident. If we want to describe God as being everywhere, so basically, Chandler, the basic answer is that we use logic. That's all we can use.
Well, here's a very important point I want to make. I believe that these attributes of God, the omnipresence, omnibenevolence, omnipotence, and omniscience, I think that those are sort of like words that the Catholic Church just made up, but that you can't really find support for that in the Bible. That's one thing that I think might be worth mentioning because there are examples of God acting like he didn't know what his creation was going to do and getting mad at him and weird stuff.
That's a good point, Chandler. But I mean, yes, we have to acknowledge very, very clearly that the Bible contradicts itself a lot. Just not in these cases, but in many other cases. So you have one prophet saying one thing, another prophet saying another. Um, but for example, like, that's why we have to go back to before the Bible, even to before Hinduism, to this more primal understanding of like, well, the gods are what controls, reality, and the supreme God, whether it's Zeus or some other conception, is what controls all the gods.
Okay, I think I get you, George. You're wanting to go like historical, going way back, pre-Christian, stuff to get back to what God meant to people long before the religions we have now.
Exactly. What caused us to conceive of first, these powers that control everything, and then, to finally, like through logic, reach the understanding that there has to be a central control for those powers.
What do you mean by central control?
Well, it's beyond. I mean, like at a certain point, also we have to acknowledge that logic will fail us. In other words, like because when we tend to talk about control, we tend to talk about cause and effect, dominoes, right? And so why does logic fail us in this? Because if the universe existed eternally, there is no first domino. There is no first controlling decision. And so we have to acknowledge that. But all right, so once we acknowledge that, and let's say we start with the Big Bang or something like, for example, the Bible says that God created the world. So naturalistically we would kind of like translate that to like, well, something created the Big Bang, whatever it is. So then from that perspective, what controls the universe, the laws of nature, is what we would describe as God controlling the world theologically.
What what worth is using this word i instead of say the universe or instead of just reality or something like that? Is obviously you want to use this word to replace these other ones, or not to replace them, but to be a part of these other ones. But does it really add something helpful, I guess, is the question.
Well, that's a good question. Then, like for example, like when we consider why we're doing this podcast on free will, I mean, I think it's two answers. One, I think we're concerned with a truth. If we believe a free will doesn't exist, I think we kind of like we want to like hold an understanding of our reality that's factual, that's true. So with this idea of God, the first consideration might be that if God is synonymous with the universe, it's kind of logically difficult to refute the existence of that God. But I think more so when we're doing this, a podcast on free will, we see very clearly the harm this free will belief causes, in so many areas. Now, all right, with the conception of God, I would have to concede that yes, God, the way God is understood today, while it causes some good, it also causes a lot of harm. You
Hmm.
know, so why maintain it? I
Hmm.
think the reason is because all right, a lot of people are incapable of understanding our shows on free will because they're so like they need to believe in a free will, and so like but with the free will thing, it's kind of like it's it's binary. It's either like we have it or not. But with the God thing, it's not binary. In other words, like because people are like so driven by their ideology, and because ideology often overrides our reason, our logic, with the God debate, I think to go from to have like the 80 or 90% of, for example, Americans that believe that that God or a higher power exists, to go from that to the understanding or to the perspective that God doesn't exist. I mean, in my opinion, it's illogical. But more so than that, it's just that it's it it would seem very improbable to make that leap. In terms of pragmatism, in terms of trying to improve the world, trying to correct these negative effects of religion, it would seem more practical
So you think
to hold on, let me finish, Strick. To just like move the population of the world from their inaccurate understanding of God to a more accurate understanding.
that conversion would be easier than abandoning their God, basically, than abandoning the word God, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd call it conversion, but like just like our like I'm not sure that we converted from you know a universe, a steady state to a Big Bang, whatever. I think it's an evolution of understanding. Like with science, with our understanding of our world scientifically evolves like year by year, decade by decade. It gets more and more factual, precise. So I think that, yes, we want the world to kind of like get a better and better understanding of this concept that they've adopted of God.
But we also abandon words, like for example, the the geocentricity of the universe, for example. Once we found out that the solar system was not geocentric, we said that doesn't exist. It's now heliocentric. So we abandoned that word instead of converting it. We didn't say, oh well, then geocentrics just means that the planets revolve around the sun instead of the Earth. We didn't convert the word. So that's, I don't know, that's the problem, I think,
Well,
with
no,
that.
Trick, I agree with you. We abandon geocentrism just like we want to abandon free will. Yes, like if a term or a concept is completely mistaken, like geocentrism, like free will, we want to like completely abandon it. Hopefully, like in 50 years, like just like free will would be like as unpopular as like the Garden of Eden. Versus evolution.
Yeah,
But
but
like
how many people do you think believe in a anthropomorphic God? And I think it would be the majority, the large majority.
and so like so you're right, and I think the large majority, what's much tougher, what's much harder, I think this than this anthropomorphizing of God is that the vast majority of people believe that God is all good, and they receive tremendous solace, comfort from this belief, you know. So yeah, we have a vast majority, perhaps 99% of people believe God is all good, and God is like, that we're in the image of God, so God looks like a person. So it's not like we don't have a lot of work to do, but it seems wiser to work within the current paradigm than to accept people to completely abandon this paradigm for something that actually doesn't logically coincide with the universe and God being synonymous.
Yeah, and in some way, I think it's a matter of educating people on how to be rational. So I think if we can educate people on how to think rationally, how to think critically, then a lot of this will come along with it. Whether they convert to some pantheistic view of the universe that is a more rational view, or an atheistic view that's a more rational view, that'll just come along with being rational. I think a lot of atheists, me included, want to educate people on how to think critically, and by keeping them in their belief of these things that aren't critically thought about, it kind of allows this kind of illogical thinking to take place, basically, within their minds, and then that kind of moves on to other bad ideas because they aren't thinking critically to begin with. So it all comes down to basically I think a more base level of critical thinking, and that's the whole free will thing that we're talking about here too. Is I think we have to get people to think critically on that so they can start abandoning that idea as well.
I agree completely. That's also like the value of science. Like to go from belief to evidence and logic, and this kind of like method. Absolutely.
Anyone else? Mitch, David?
I have so much to say.
Okay, you go.
So, George, you've talked about other people. How about yourself? Can you comfortably deal with the possibility that God does not exist? That you're not finding a more accurate way to describe reality, but that possibly the term is completely unnecessary, and it would be simpler in some ideal world where people are good at coping with things. Just to say, God doesn't exist. I don't believe in God. Just like free will doesn't exist, God doesn't exist. The term isn't needed. Could you cope with that possibility?
I believe I've coped with a much more difficult possibility, much more
But
difficult
please answer
actually.
the question though.
I'm
Like,
answering
have
you.
you ever considered the notion that perhaps God does not exist? Period. There is no
I have
God.
I've
Done.
actually become comfortable, not accepted something that's far more difficult than the prospect that God doesn't exist, which is the prospect that God is not all good. God is, any heinous this massacre in Florida, that's God. Hitler was God. These atrocities. So that, to my mind, is far more difficult to accept than the idea that God doesn't exist. And yes, I have.
Well, I think there's evidence to show it isn't, because it seems very difficult for you to say that, to cope with the idea
Oh,
that God.
hi,
Mitch,
everybody.
Mitch, how you doing, WC? What I'm trying to explain to you is not only have I said that yes, it's possible for me to accept it, that I've accepted something that's far more difficult to accept.
I don't think you. Well, I disagree. I don't think it's more difficult. I think what you've done is you've allowed this idea of God to persist, but you've transformed it. For example, we talked about the Greco-Roman tradition. In the Greco-Roman tradition, in that pantheon, the gods were not all good. The gods had personalities. The gods were capricious, and they favored certain people over others, and they had many flaws, but people still worshiped them, still believed in them. In fact, these flaws, given the historical context of when these stories originated, actually helped people believe in this uh, in this polytheistic mythology, because the people of that time were more open to the idea of gods having flaws. So saying that a god does bad things sometimes or isn't perfect or whatever, that is not an indicator to me. That's not you demonstrating to me that you personally, as an individual, can cope with the idea that things have causes, but there is no control.
Um, I personally, whatever the Greeks, whoever, believed their acceptance of God, that's them. I just told you that I've accepted that God is both all good and all evil is attributed to God. The reason the reason I don't feel comfortable, actually, in a certain sense, with accepting the idea that God doesn't exist is because it's so illogical. It's like, if God is defined as what controls everything, you can't. It's illogical to say that God doesn't exist. If God is defined as everything, it's illogical to say the universe exists. What's illogical, I'm not comfortable accepting from that standpoint.
George, I have a question here that's very important. Now, clearly, people attribute a number of attributes, omnipotence, omnipresence, omnibenevolence. And here's the deal. What you've done is you've dropped omnibenevolence from your idea of God. But why drop that attribute and not drop omnipotence or omnipresence, for example? Why, which at how what system do you go by of which attribute do you decide you don't want?
It's the same logic. If logic compels us to hold an ever-present, everywhere universe, and the idea of God being everything synonymous, and if logic compels us to see like the laws of nature as synonymous with God controlling everything, that same logic compels us to see that if God is controlling everything and there is both good and evil happening, God has to be the source of both.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, yeah, I get what you're saying because if you are holding to an omnipresent conception of God, then yes, the only thing that's omnipresent is the universe or the whole of reality. So I get you there, but that's just one attribute. Why, I mean, like, here's the deal. Like, it seems that somebody else might take a different route. They might say, well, God is all good. He's omnibenevolent, but he's not omnipresent. They might take that route.
Well, Chandler, again, like what refutes that contention is simple logic. If we're starting, let's say like the omnipresence thing, let's just start with like the conception of God as like what controls everything. So if we start with that, it just like very simple logic, leads you to conclude that no, if God controls everything, God can't just be all good and not evil. God has to be both. So that's the consideration isn't based on omnipresence or being everywhere. It's about the control aspect.
But God doesn't have to be either good or evil. He could just be Uh, Neither, basically. It could just be just the process that happens. So it's I guess I don't know what you mean by good and evil in that context. The fact that bad things happen and good things happen
Well,
to conscious creatures.
that's a good question, Trick. In other words, like, so yeah, the terms goodness and evil are conventional. They're kind of like, all right, John Locke. I think this is, and we've discussed the nature of goodness, morality, and stuff before. So it's not a straightforward, exploration. It does invite complexities. But for example, if we start with a definition of goodness, let's say we accept John Locke's. John Locke said, well, goodness is what creates happiness, and I get presumably pleasure, whatever. And then Jeremy Bentham would say that, like, well, the measure of goodness is what creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number. So yeah, it's if we accept that definition of goodness, then obviously we would define evil as what creates pain and suffering and unhappiness.
Yeah,
Then,
but we wouldn't say like the universe is evil because it's ambivalent to that. It just happens in the universe, but the universe doesn't care that it happens. It doesn't care that it doesn't happen. It's ambivalent. It doesn't
well,
think about it.
trick,
Exactly.
trick. I mean, but think about it. If the universe, let's say we define the universe as ambivalent, I
Hello,
think
Will.
another
So,
another another definition of ambivalent, I think that applies to this is indifferent. So in other
Yeah,
words, like, to the extent that,
indifferent.
for example, right. So the extent, for example, that we in the rich countries are indifferent to the 2 billion people on the planet that hardly have enough to eat, in my estimation, that's extremely evil. That's not just ambivalent. That's not, that is very, very evil. And especially, like, I mean, we're not in control of everything, but God is not. God is actually in control of this stuff.
Well,
Well, I George.
yeah, there's no control. There's no control. So the universe does what it does because it's constrained by its own variables. So it has no more control than we do. So to say that it is evil, you're kind of imposing something on the universe that is no different than what we're not imposing on humans, basically.
All
Thanks,
right, well,
Trick. That's
let's
what I meant
explore
to
that.
say.
All right, and you may be right. And actually, I have like used this explanation as a vindication, an absolution of God also, because, like, yes, because I don't like to see God as evil, right? So how can we get God off the hook? Yes, in other words, like, if we concede that the universe goes eternally backwards, then there is no decision point at which God, the universe, however you want to describe it, decided to create a world that would result in this evil and pain and suffering. So
Right.
yeah, I accept that, absolutely.
Yeah, when we can technically say that the universe is kind of just dumb about it. It doesn't think at all. It's dumb forces basically that lead up to conscious creatures that have the capacity to experience pain and suffer.
All right. Well, I mean, again, like, if we're moving from, like, the existence of God to kind of like the kind of description of what God is, or the universe, whatever, then then to further assert that the universe or God is, quote unquote, dumb, which means kind of like ignorant, whatever, or just like non participatory, perhaps, is maybe what you more fully
Well,
mean.
I would say non-conscious, but
Not, all
or
right,
unconscious. Unconscious would be
all
the way
right,
to put it. Until obviously creatures evolved that had consciousness, and then that part of the universe has all these little pieces that are conscious, but that's about
right.
it.
All right. So, like, basically, like, the way to address that is, like, I think it's difficult to separate consciousness, for example, from intelligence. I think intelligence would be kind of like an aspect of consciousness. Um,
I
so,
disagree.
go ahead.
Like, I tend to think that something could be conscious without intelligence, or some things we refer to as intelligent even if they're not conscious. We may refer to, like, a computer algorithm or whatever program being doing something intelligently even if it's not conscious of it.
All right, good point. Good point. So if we stay just with the consciousness, it gets us into, in other words, like, is the universe aware that the universe exists? I think I'm not, from our scientific perspective, that's an answer. That's a question we can't answer scientifically.
Well,
Um,
actually, we can, George. And here's the deal. Because if the universe is everything, then that includes us, and we're conscious of ourselves and the rest of the universe, at least what we know of. So, of course, the universe is aware of itself because we are the universe, remember?
well, no, but Chandler, you got to realize, like, this is a very, very teeny planet within a relatively small galaxy within this immensity. So, like, just the fact that there's consciousness here doesn't necessarily suggest that there has to be it may be, but like, if you're making that point, expand it. How does consciousness here, expand to like the universe by logic needing to be conscious of itself?
Well, it's not about needing to be conscious. It's just that the fact that are conscious creatures, whether it's here or anywhere else, the location doesn't matter. The point is we have intelligence and consciousness, and that we see that in humans and other animals on this planet. And so, if suppose that was the only consciousness in the universe, that would still be enough to label the universe conscious because it contains conscious creatures.
Well, I would agree. I would agree from a certain perspective that the universe contains consciousness and like is conscious in that sense. But then I'm not sure we can, from that say that the universe is completely conscious of itself. I tend to hold that belief, but
Me, I don't think it's conscious of itself at all.
and actually I'm not sure if it's a belief. In other words, like, I guess the way I see it is like, for
I'm with
example,
Will.
it really revolves around the definition of awareness. What is it to be aware? And so we have this, and then sometimes,
Because if
sometimes
it is conscious, it's an asshole.
well, yeah, I mean, the guy has problems. So like the
I had to say that.
yeah, so yeah, so like, in other words, like, to control, let's say, like, the laws of nature control, matter, control the forces of nature. Um,
Or
now,
constrain it maybe. The laws of nature, they're just like they don't.
Yeah,
They're
everything,
part of
everything
the
against us. Everything wants us dead, pretty much. Yeah.
yeah, the laws of nature are part of the gears basically. So it's like saying the
It seems like your
gears
ears might
control
kill
the
us too.
clock. The gears don't control the clock; they're part of the clock, or any other mechanism. They're just part of the mechanism.
all right, let's explore that in more detail, because, like, with a clock, you have, like, the gears, but then you also have the forces of the laws of nature that control the movement of the gears. So this
But
is kind of like exploring it at a level a bit more fundamental.
yeah, but
You
there's
know,
no distinction. Like it's all part of one whole thing. So you have the gears, you have the the gravity, you have all the forces, the four different forces. So you have all the different laws of nature, but they're all one's not more fundamental than the other. The 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 matter in the universe isn't less fundamental, I guess. If you put
Okay,
it
George,
another way.
does the idea of control that you have of like, let's say, gravity, does gravity control things?
yes, gravity is
Yeah,
like, is
to an
an
extent.
inescapable attraction of one thing to another. It controls the behavior of everything.
Okay, now here's a question. Can gravity decide to make apples fall up from the tree instead of down?
Nope.
Right. I would, no, no.
That happens in a video game, by the way.
Yeah. Also, you could ask if gravity is evil for making buildings and other things fall down on people.
That's well, David. That I would agree with you, but I think what's evil is not the gravity per se, but that the universe evolved sentient beings like us and other animals that are capable of feeling pain. Because we have to also recognize that without pain, this concept of evil just couldn't exist.
Well, how do you know the universe isn't trying to just make us suffer and get rid of us for causing
Yeah,
pollution
that
and
is a good
things like
question
that?
because I mean there are a lot of things out there that could kill us.
Yeah, it
Well,
looks like the universe is designed to kill us.
David,
Yeah,
it's not.
because
It's not a matter of if. It's a matter of when. I mean, we're gone. You know, a couple million years, yeah, we're out of here. So yeah.
Yeah, and climate change will kill us all soon anyway.
now Apophis and Jamie keep talking
So
about.
Chandler, yeah. All right. So like, yeah, gravity can't decide to make apples fall upward. What was your line of reasoning with that?
Oh, okay. Like I think the concept of control requires the ability to decide to do otherwise, in a sense. It's sort of like without free will, it doesn't seem like there is control.
All right. Well, I would agree with you from the perspective that the universe goes back in time eternally, so that we can't reach a decision point. But for example, like if we take the Big Bang as the beginning of our known universe, then I think we can conclude that whatever came before it determined, controlled, decided, made everything that was, this first domino that we call the Big Bang.
I don't know how we know that that wasn't an accident.
Um, Accident. I mean, like, how are you defining accident? What do you mean?
How you know that Big Bang wasn't done by accident of some form or another, or like you said,
All right. Well, let's say we agree. Let's say it was an accident. All right. So like, if it was an accident, that presupposes that it was like unintentional. So if it was an accident, then there certainly was an intention that didn't actualize.
Yeah, now here's an interesting question, George. Okay, so let's say that the universe intends to do something, but it makes a mistake, and so there's an accident, and the universe can't do what it intends.
Okay.
Then
Well,
how is it in control?
yeah, personally, Chandler, you're right. I personally, it seems logic goes against the idea of accidents, in the sense of like, what controls everything, making, not being able to control everything. Because, right, an accident, as you're saying, just suggests that something went wrong. And to my thinking, that seems illogical. In other words, like the laws of nature have to control everything. There can't be an accident or an exception to that.
Yeah, it depends on how we see it. We see an accident. What we think an accident is, I guess, because I tend to think of it as trying to do one thing, but something wrong goes wrong in that plan.
Yeah, and we can't really bring it. I guess we can't really just bring it back to the Big Bang either. Like let's say that
yeah,
something does cause the Big Bang, then
yeah,
obviously there's probably something
or
that
it could be a
causes whatever
multiverse.
causes the Big Bang, right? So
Right. And again, and that's a key point, because like ultimately we can't avoid this point at which logic will fail, unless we're not seeing it completely. I think we are. In other words, like if time and reality spans back indefinitely, eternally into the past, you know, that just, how did things, how did the things that happen, like in other words, there's order, there's like these laws of nature, kind of like govern according to these laws that are mathematical, or we can understand them mathematically. How does that come from, like, you know, just this understanding that there was never a beginning? So
right.
so it's
Yeah, we have two really counterintuitive options. We either everything extends back in time eternally. We have an eternalistic uh, idea of reality, or something popped into existence acausally, basically. So we have those two. Those are the only two options we have available to us. So, and they're both pretty counterintuitive. So, but either way, there's nothing that I don't know that I think it could be considered a god in that scenario, or something that is the controlling factor. either something happened, acausally, or it's just an eternal string of causes.
Well, then, I mean, to the extent that we would do away with the concept of God, we would have to do away with the concept of control or causality.
Well, not causality, but control in the sense of conscious control. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah, there's still causality, but there's like no freely willing domino to be the first domino to hit all the others.
Well, that's another. I mean, like, so, like, to the extent God, the universe, however, we want to describe it, um, does it have a free will? And so I think we've done shows on this. Like we've presented the understanding that, like, well, in the present moment, it doesn't have a free will. It's completely constrained by what happened in the past. Going back to the Big Bang and before. But then the question of whether this logic transcending eternity or acausality, however you want to describe it, was free. I mean, what would it be free from? Because if it's everything, freedom usually means free from something else. So it's difficult to apply that
Yeah,
to
well,
a single
here's
entity.
an example, George. Imagine a multiverse scenario where there's this one domino, and we'll say that this domino was the first cause or God, okay? And there's like eight different uh, whole trains of dominoes around this domino, and this domino is deciding which row of dominoes it wants to fall into. How is that decision made? It either has to be causal or acausal.
Yeah, that's kind of why I believe there. No offense, don't beat me down for this, but I kind of believe in a multiverse for that sense. Like some reason, I just believe in it. It just, like I said, we're a product of our environment, but say if our say if our environment was slightly different in the past, and it
But
kind of branches off.
WSD, this concept of a multiverse, I think it exists depending on how we understand or define it. In other words, like if we're positing that, like, this Big Bang is one of an infinite number of Big Bangs that are happening, all the time, and they're just too far away for us to, like, know anything about, then I think that that use of the word multiverse makes a lot of sense. But we
Yeah.
also have to be concerned. In other words, like the word linguistically universe refers to one. So even if we had this infinite number of multiverses, they would all be subsumed or be part of this one reality that would still, I think, just be the universe. A universe, filled with multiverses.
George, if we kept on redefining the word temperature, we could use the word temperature to describe something that currently people would never use the word temperature to describe. And then we could say that we have found the accurate way to use the word temperature, and everyone else did it the wrong way. We create words so we can represent certain ideas. We try to communicate ideas. Nietzsche once said that, well, if I can paraphrase Nietzsche, because I want to add something to it. He said that, paraphrasing Nietzsche, that words and sounds, these symbols, they're just the scratchings, the writings, and the sounds we make to communicate ideas. So it doesn't make any sense to want a particular word to persist unless you want some connotations that are associated with that word to persist. If you want all of the ideas that are usually associated with a word to go away, then the best strategy is to use a different word. So Chandler made some great points a few minutes ago when he said that the universe has stuff in it. The universe is a word that's used to describe the bag. and there's stuff inside the bag. If gravity must do what it does, if everything must do what it does, because as we all know, free will doesn't exist, and if the universe is just a bag that contains stuff, why should we call it God? Why should we call it conscious?
Well, again, this goes back to how we started this. If the basic understanding of God and gods came from this understanding that things happen and there's a reason why or a cause why they
Why don't we
happen.
call the universe temperature?
Mitch, don't let me finish answering your question. So if we start with this premise that this idea of God, the word God, came to from people's attempt to describe why things happen, that's the fundamental definition of God. That's irrefutable.
What,
You know,
I don't know what you meant. Again, so the word is just a label that people make up, and over time the word has connotations. So, why don't we call the universe temperature? Why don't we just say it's temperature? We'll use the word temperature instead. The universe is now temperature.
because the universe is not temperature. I mean,
This is the illogical part. This is the part where the logic is missing, okay? You're putting you're you're misplacing the priority between the word and the idea. God is a word, and that word is used to represent an idea. So I'm offering a different word for the same idea. So I'm saying let's call the universe temperature.
well, that's what I'm saying. So in other words, like the universe and God, like God was the first word we had. Now, like more naturalistically, scientifically, we use the word universe. It's the same thing. I'm not against that at all. In other words, from a scientific context, and actually for the reason you cite, because like God, has been kind of like the concept of God. It within theology is extremely confused in ways that we don't want science to have. So yeah, we call God the
So can
universe
you say
within
the
science.
following sentence? Can you say the following sentence? God doesn't exist. The universe exists.
God doesn't
No, because
exist. The universe exists.
Mitch, can you say the following sentence? God and the universe are synonymous.
You've missed the point again, right? So again, you're changing your priorities on words and ideas. You were just adamant in this word God, the word. So you've just contradicted yourself. According to what you said, if you're truly being honest about what you're saying, okay, you should be more than willing to go, oh yeah, okay, fine. God doesn't exist. The universe exists. And then we can talk about whether the universe is conscious and just never use the word God again.
Yeah, but
What
he's using the two. So he has a definition of God that is the universe. So
Yeah,
when you're
so I'm
telling
saying,
him,
so,
so
so
when
I'm
you're
saying if
telling
God is
him,
just the word, let's just not use the word. So let's stop using the word. That's what I'm challenging you to do. Let's stop using
but
that.
then you're saying, well, does God? Can you say that God doesn't exist, but the universe does? But if he's using
Okay,
his definition of
fair
God,
enough. I
then
see
it's a
your point.
problem.
I see your point. Let's
So
just say, okay, we're not going to use the word God. That's a bad word. Let's say the universe. So the universe exists. And now we can talk about whether or not the universe is conscious. Can we do that? Can we agree to that instead of going back and forth and contradicting ourselves and injecting the word God and then saying it is, saying it isn't? Let's just strike the word God out. So God is gone. Just the universe. Can we
Well,
do
no, I
that?
mean, like, yeah,
Why
we're not
no?
gonna,
Why is it no? I know.
we're not gonna, we want to move from, yeah, you're saying we want to move from the
Let's strike the
understanding of
word
God.
God. No,
No, I
no.
know.
I'm
We don't
no,
want
no.
to strike
I'm
the
talking
word.
about the
We
word.
want
The
to, like, we
word.
want to say that we've already explored God relative to the universe. Now we want to
No, that's
explore
not what I'm
the nature
saying,
of,
George. Again, see, I can feel it. See, I can feel that what you're saying isn't really matching how you truly feel,
no,
because
you can't, Mitch, because I don't
here's
think you
why. Here's the
understand what
evidence.
I'm saying.
I understand it completely.
I
We've
don't
heard the
think
argument
so.
many times. I'm saying, here's what I'm saying. God is just an idea, it's just a word, just a word. Let's not use that word. So as an olive branch, I would like you to say, you're right. We don't need that word. No more
I'm not
word.
going to offer you that, but I don't agree with it. I think it's wrong. I think
Why?
it's
What's wrong with the
illogical.
word? The word. I'm saying the word. Just like symbols, letters, just like BAT. Like I'm saying, let's call this bad anymore. Let's use a different word. Just a word. I'm not talking about the idea.
I guess a better way to put it is imagine that everybody today abandoned the word. Would you still promote them to convert back to using the word at that point if they've abandoned it and said that God didn't exist?
All right, if you want to like go from the word God to the word universe, and you kind of like acknowledge that the God that's like described in the Bible and dictionaries is synonymous with the universe, then yes, I would have no objection under that contingency, under that criteria.
Well, so if everybody said that God doesn't exist, I mean everybody except for you because you define God differently. Would you still promote the way you define God to these people and say, well, we should be using the word God because of the etymology or whatever of the word?
All right, but your premise was if everyone were to say that God doesn't exist.
Yeah, because like they become atheists, let's just say.
And that's where we started. In other words, like, just like it's illogical to say that the universe is not everywhere, it's illogical to say that that God, defined as everywhere, doesn't exist.
Okay, but what if they just said that God doesn't exist? Not however they define God, they just say that God doesn't exist.
Well, that's like free will believers saying that free will exists, defining it in a way that doesn't coincide with the nature of the debate.
So your whole debate is a semantic one. You think that God is defined as this specific thing, and that is what everybody should be using, correct?
Yes, I mean, again, because we talked about the pragmatics also. It's not just a matter of truth. It's like I think it's much more reasonable to move humanity from a deeply hurtful, mistaken conception of God to a more accurate conception of God than to suppose that we can move humanity from their belief in God to a belief that God doesn't exist.
Yeah, but in my scenario, we're supposing that they've already moved away from the belief that they have into a atheist belief. So they've converted from theism to atheism. Regardless of what they were, what their conception of God was, that is what they now have. Would you, at that point, say, well, people should be using the word
Well,
God to mean the universe at this point, and try to get the word back, I guess.
no trick. Let's use it. We can use free will for this. I mean, like the vast majority of people believe in free will. I'm not going to say, all right, since the vast majority of people believe in free will, we're going to change the meaning of free will so that yes, it exists, because that would just confuse people.
Well,
What?
um,
That doesn't make any logical sense. What are you talking? You just said it's the exact opposite of what you're saying.
Trick, do you want to reiterate what I said?
Yeah, I got confused. Go ahead, say it again.
All right, you're saying that if the majority of people accept the atheist conception of God not existing, should we accept that because that's a majority opinion? I mean, is that what you said, or
no? Please
no.
allow me to quickly allow me to quickly illuminate what the problem is here. So the majority of people believe free will exists and use the term free will. So the majority of people use the term free will. It means something very particular to them, and they think it exists. We, as people who understand it does not exist, say firstly, don't use the term because it doesn't exist. Let's compare that to God. Look at how this is directly analogous. The majority of people believe in God and use the term God. We, as people who understand this God does not exist, say firstly, let's not use the term. You see, it's the same thing. So the way you're comparing free will, you just a complete non sequitur. You just said the complete opposite of what it should be.
The fundamental difference is that God does exist and free will doesn't.
What are you
per how
talking?
you're defining the term God.
Forget
Exactly.
the word God. I'm talking about
Both
the
how
idea. Let's talk about
both
the
how
idea.
we're defining the term God and free will. Again, we went over this. This is how we started.
No,
If
no,
we're
no, no, no.
defining,
I think George, you're getting confused here. Hold on a second. When I say God, okay, I'm not talking about your nuanced imagining of the word God. Whatever. I'm just
you
saying.
actually
I'm talking
are.
about
You
No, no, no.
are.
I'm
You
not.
don't
I'm not. I'm
realize
not.
it.
I'm just
You
told you
are.
I'm not. So I'm
So
not.
our define
I'm
God.
saying. Hold on.
No, wait a
Okay.
minute. You're
Fair
saying
enough. I
God doesn't
will.
exist.
Give me a
Define
moment.
God.
Give me a moment. I'm saying. People have a very concrete idea in their minds of what God is. People have an idea in their minds.
Forget
You
about
have,
people.
hold
Talk
on.
about yourself. How
No,
are you
no,
defining
please,
God?
George, please. You've spoken for a long time. Allow me. Thank you. People have a very concrete idea, especially in the Abrahamic faiths, of what God is. It's reinforced by their religious leaders and their religious texts and their religious communities. They have an idea, a concept of God. Just the idea. I'm not talking about the word. I don't care what letters and symbols you want. That idea. You, George, have a different idea. So
I
you have an
don't. You're
idea.
misrepresenting me. I don't
No,
have a
no,
different
you
idea.
have a different. Do you believe that Abraham? You know what I'm saying? I'm talking about very specific things.
Do I believe what? That Abraham what?
The
Do
God of
do you
See
Abraham.
the hey,
Abraham. Do you think Abraham made a covenant with God and the Jewish people? Do you believe in the diaspora? Do you think that actually happened?
No, but that's not what we're
Okay, hold on.
contesting. That's
No,
not what
no,
the.
no, George, you're being illogical. Hold on a second.
No,
Listen to what
you're
I'm
being
saying.
illogical.
I am saying when people have a concrete idea, that is part of the idea. They have an idea. You have a different idea. You don't have the same idea. There are certain properties in your idea that you've identified. I've heard you say it many times. And you see commonalities. You see properties such as omnipresence, but not omnibenevolence, omniscience, but not omnibenevolence, once again. So there's certain commonalities, there's certain common properties in the idea of God that you have, and the idea of God that most people on earth have, in particular, those people who follow the Abrahamic faiths. You do not have exactly the same idea. You have very, very, very different ideas. But
I
they are,
don't. I don't. In other words, like
no,
fundamentally, the God of
can
the
someone help me
Bible.
out here? Do you guys see what I'm saying here? So
but
my point.
Fundamentally, the God
well,
of the
I have
Bible
No,
is
no,
something
no,
to
no,
how
no.
say
is
here.
the.
Hi, I'm Sarah Foster, and I am.
My bad. Sorry.
So the
Sarah Foster.
I don't know how I can say this any clearer.
You
What
are
you
Too
saying it
have,
bad.
clearly. It's
Too
just
listen.
bad.
you're
No, 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 no.
misrepresenting me, and
Listen. I don't. You should
I
be
understand
agreeing
what you're saying,
because
Mitch. I
I'm
disagree
saying
with it.
but it's clear that you don't. You've said, for example, you don't. Do you believe God is omnibenevolent? Do you
I
think God
told
is
you.
all?
Why are you asking me that?
No, no, no. There's a reason why. Because I'm going to show you. Look. Do you believe God is omnibenevolent? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that because I answered that before. You tell me what I said before.
Oh, okay, so you said, so let's just think of the logic. So you said before, no, you do not think God is omnibenevolent. Now, does a Christian think God is omnibenevolent? Yes. Therefore, logically, you do not have the same idea of God
I never
that a
said I
Christian.
have the complete same idea.
Hold
We've
on.
gone
Okay,
over this.
good, good, good. So let's, good. So we agree. Great. So since you don't have the complete same idea, you don't have the same idea. That's logic.
Oh,
You
you're
do
wrong,
not.
Mitch, because like to
No,
have
no, I'm not
99,
wrong. This is just a logical
Mitch,
sentence. You
listen,
said
to have
it. No, 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 no.
99%,
Please.
Hey,
you're
If you
calm
wrong.
say
down,
it's,
guys.
let me finish. Let me
yeah,
finish.
yeah, yeah.
If you say
One at a time.
logically, just logically, if you say it's not completely the same, then logically it is not the same. It is either
You're
completely the same or it's not. So it's not. So
you're
you and a
wrong.
Christian, it's not wrong. It's just no one. You can't
No,
disagree. I know you can.
your logic is wrong.
What are you talking about, George?
Well,
Listen carefully to
do
what
you
I'm
want me to
saying.
explain why it's wrong,
Hold on,
or
wait. No, I don't want to explain. I just want you to listen to something. It has nothing to do with the topic. This is just a logical sentence here. This is the building blocks of reasoning here. If you say your idea is different, just a little bit, just a tiny, tiny bit, if it's not exactly the same idea, then it's not the same idea. The only way it could be the same idea is if it is the same. That's logic. It's either the same or it isn't. So if the Christian God is omnibenevolent, and your idea of God is not omnibenevolent, then it is not the same. These are two different ideas.
I
So I'm
think what
saying because your ideas are different, we should use. Well, anyway, go ahead, Trick.
I think what Mitch is saying is it's not the same, but it could be similar. So you can have similarities, but it's not identical. That's all.
My stronger point, which really makes your point moot, Mitch, is that like benevolence was not a fundamental definition of God. That basically, like I'm addressing the fundamental, the essential, primary definition of God
It was
as
according to
being
Augustine.
synonymous with the universe.
I think a part of this whole debate that we're having kind of today, it has to do with how definitions come about, how semantics happen. So you, George, seem to want to you have this idea of the history of the word and the etymology of the word, and you kind of have this idea that that is the definition. Whereas I don't think that's how definitions happen.
Well,
Most words that we have today, they have an etymology to them that are completely different than the way that they're used today. Completely different. I mean, we look at the etymology and we say that was what it actually meant when it's a totally different word today. So we can't really go by like an argument from etymology. We can say that that was the etymology of the word, but the way it's used today in the larger context is completely different.
all right,
So it's
but Trick, the way the people use today the word God is exactly the way I'm using it. God as what controls everything. God as being everything.
yeah, but they also think God is a conscious creator deity, right? You don't, and you're saying that that's not necessarily in your definition, but most people would say that would be definitely be a part of their definition.
Actually,
So
well, I mean, I agree with that, except that logic doesn't allow us to consider that question.
we'll say that again.
I agree with that conception of God as being the creator, whatever, but logic doesn't allow us to explore or explain that
Well,
contention.
yeah, well, like not just creator, but a conscious deity that has thoughts
Right.
and
Again, I agree with that. From a logical standpoint, again, because like sometimes I believe personally that we've anthropomorphized the word consciousness, awareness, to be limited to human beings or higher life forms and stuff. My use of consciousness, um, Gail Strawson,
I think you
who
mean
also,
anthropocentrized, not anthropomorphized.
thank you. All right, so like Gail Strawson with this view that the universe is conscious. That happens to be my it's a logical construction. In other words, like to my thinking, to be able to control something, you have to be aware of it. And naturally, I'm not saying aware how we human beings are aware, but aware and actually in a much more complete sense.
right. Yeah, so we'd have to have a different debate on that because I would I know I do, but I don't know about Mitch. But I don't think that panpsychism, which is the idea that of Strawson's basically that everything is conscious, is true. I think that that's false. I think consciousness is only within specific configurations of matter and energy. So that's a different debate. If you
Excuse me,
if
this is a little off subject, but Jamie's trying to get in.
Jamie is
Chandler?
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll see if I can add him.
But you're saying that you kind of align with that idea
Well, I
of
mean, you have to understand, Trick, in psychology, the word conscious, consciousness, whatever conscious, has about 20 definitions. I tend to take the most general, the most accepted.
which is what.
Simple awareness. Like, in other words, like we are conscious of our thoughts, of the environment, of our feelings. Yeah.
But you think like before creatures evolved. Let's say 5 billion years ago. Do you think that there was consciousness? I guess.
Yeah, and the reason I think that is because I can't see intelligence, and this is interesting because this addresses Chandler's point about like computers, whether computers are conscious or not. I can't see intelligence from emerging from something that's not conscious.
Okay, so this might have something to do with our I guess our disagreements, because because of this kind of idea that you have that consciousness kind of flows backward, all the way to the Big Bang, that I can actually see that as some kind sort of God concept. You know what I'm saying? But for me, I don't believe that. I think that consciousness evolved and that was it. So it didn't happen like that. It was just a causal process that took place. So in that case, I can't see a God concept that would fit with that type of idea.
Right. Now, so I wouldn't use the concept of God, of consciousness, as evidence for God's existence, because like again, because consciousness or being conscious is a word with many meanings, because it could be applied in very different ways. I simply rely on the control and the everywhereness, the idea that both the universe and God are everywhere and controlling everything, whether or not this control is conscious.
Hey,
Right.
there's something I wanted to ask a while back, but you guys have been going at it. Like, okay, let's suppose that you see the Westboro Pantheist Church holding a sign that says "Universe hates fags." Like, what does that mean to you?
That would mean to me that they're probably holding a prophetic conception of religion that we need to basically destroy. We need to, completely defeat.
Hmm. So, but okay, is it true that the universe hates fags or gay people or whatever?
Um, I no, I don't think so. It doesn't, no, I don't think it. No, I mean, like you could ask, is it true that the universe hates sentient beings? Because forget about just gays and stuff. In other words, like sentient beings suffer. I mean, so like so does God, the universe, hate sentient beings for creating these beings that and then like afflicting? I think hate is I think maybe more indifference. I think the universe, God, seems to be indifferent to gays, to sentient beings in general. Not in other words, like a completely good God, I think wouldn't punish or cause to suffer any sentient being. Wouldn't create sentient beings that are capable of suffering.
Yeah, well, here's an interesting point, George. I think we're getting somewhere because here's the deal. Um, I think the goodness issue is where the biggest trouble here is because you've got one group of religious people saying that God is omnibenevolent, and then you've got other people who are saying, well, God is, indifferent or just downright evil, and it's kind of an interesting thing because I think this gets into a truth statement because we get even if we try to grant and say, well, God is synonymous with the universe, even if we do that, we still have this problem of the omnibenevolence debate.
Well, Chandler, this is kind of like quite related to our free will thing because, like, even though most religions, you know, tout free will, that they say the Bible says free will, the term free will, the concept is not in the Bible. So just so it's in other words, like, even though most people believe that God is all good, omnibenevolent, actually in Isaiah, God Himself is quoted as saying, "I create light, I create darkness, I create good, I create evil." So so the Bible actually says that God is not omnibenevolent.
Yeah, and this is very important because you're absolutely right, George. It does say that, which leads to a very interesting idea that what people are believing about God or the universe or whatever their belief is, it's based on something that they hear from their religious leaders or it's something that they have an emotional need to believe, but it doesn't have to do much with what either the Bible or the Quran says or what evidence actually shows because people have a certain emotional bias, and this is where the real disagreement comes with religion, I think.
Chandler, I'm not sure we could say it doesn't have much to do, but it certainly doesn't have all to do with. In other words,
Right.
like, yeah.
Yeah, like their emotional biases will kind of veto what the text actually says or what evidence actually shows scientifically, for example.
And that's our biggest challenge in refuting free will. We have to very not just acknowledge, we have to very clearly understand this process of ideology and personal beliefs and all that overrides people's reasoning. Just like it overrides what it might say in the Bible, it overrides the logic that we tend to use to refute free will. We have to address, you know, what these emotional needs, these ideological concepts are that are preventing people from accepting the logic.
George, I do understand your point. You are saying that a long time ago, people observed the world around them and were trying to make sense of it. And they called something God. And they thought they identified its properties. But in your opinion, they made a mistake. They listed some properties and had some ideas, looked at the world around them, but they made a mistake. For example, one mistake they made is they thought God was omnibenevolent. And you're saying, actually, this thing that you're looking for in reality, there's something like it, but it's not omnibenevolent. So that's one mistake you guys made. And you're saying you, George, are an acutheist. And these other people, these other theistic people of old times and even those who linger to the present day, still have. Hello?
Yeah, we're here.
My Skype said my microphone wasn't detected for some reason. You guys can hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. So you're saying you're calling yourself an acutheist because this kind of exploration they did was a sort of scientific exploration, really, because they're trying to describe the world around them. And they said a whole bunch of stuff. And you're saying, well, a lot of that stuff is wrong, but some of it was right because they were looking at the universe, they were trying to find it. So you're an acutheist, you got it the right way. God does exist, but this is what God is. It's not that.
Except I would say that most of what they said is right. Some of what they said is
Fair enough,
wrong.
fair enough. So you can use the word most if you want. It's, I'm just trying to summarize this. I would say, what are you talking about? There's something called science. Science is all we need. Science is the truth. Science is the reality. There's math, there's logic, there's science. And the rest is superstition and nonsense. So if we just want to look at the word scientifically, then we have the universe as a word that describes everything. We have conscious things, some things that inhabit that universe are conscious. But there is no thing, because the word universe is just a word that describes all of the things. So it's like we're creating this additional agent that logically is impossible. Just in mathematics, there's a corollary to this. There's something called a set. And a set isn't a thing. A set is just a collection of elements. It's not really there. You just take a bunch of things and you call it a set. So the set can't be conscious. That doesn't make sense. But the elements within it can be. So consciousness is not something, from the viewpoint that I'm illustrating right now, that the universe could have, because the universe is not capable of being conscious. Trick pointed out that perhaps consciousness is just a result of a sufficiently complex being. You either need a brain or a machine brain or something like it. So you can say the universe has conscious elements within it, but the universe itself can't be conscious because the universe is just a word that's used to describe the set of all things.
How are you defining consciousness?
The same as you, just awareness. So the universe has things that are aware and things that are not aware. But it's illogical and impossible to say the universe is aware, because the universe is just a term used to describe everything that exists. It's not actually a thing, it's just a word that we use to describe everything that exists.
The universe is not just a word, the universe is the only thing that exists. Anything else that exists is subsumed within the universe.
Let me give you an example. Does New York City exist? Or does what really exists? Does New York City exist, or is it really the stuff in New York City? Is New York City just a word to
Nope.
help us
New York
describe
exists.
to help us describe stuff? Like, what does
Actually,
it mean? What does it mean to say New York City exists? Is there a difference between New York City and all the stuff in New York City?
there is, but both exist.
Yeah, this is interesting about New York because I'm thinking that maybe God is synonymous with New York City.
I agree. That has to be the right answer.
I've been wrong all the time. I need to tell people I believe in God, and God is New York City.
Does a bunch of bananas exist? Is there a such thing as a bunch of bananas? What's a bunch of bananas?
Ooh,
A
but
cluster of bananas.
So is a bunch conscious? Does that make sense? Does it make sense to say a murder of crows is conscious? When you say a murder of crows is conscious, what are you really saying? You're saying each crow is conscious, correct? If I were to say a murder of crows is conscious. By the way, when I use the word murder, we all know it. I mean a quantity of crows, right?
Yeah.
I don't mean okay.
All right,
So
Mitch, I mean, like,
oh,
no, but in this
basically, like,
example, just humor me for a second. If I were to say a murder of crows is conscious, would you not interpret that sentence as meaning every crow in this group of crows is conscious? Is that not the only way that could possibly be meaningful?
no, I think, for example, Jung's whole theory of the collective unconscious, has this idea that yes, we have individual consciousnesses, but we can also work collectively as a unitary consciousness.
yeah, I would like for there to be some satisfaction that we reach in this episode because it seems like we get into this thing about words and what words mean. And now, like, for example, do we agree that all words, like, people make up words because they have ideas and then they invent words to represent those ideas, but that these words don't perhaps necessarily have any objective meaning outside of human speech.
Right. Well,
Well,
yeah, words just they classify things that we observe.
Words are
So
just symbols and
yeah,
sounds that we use to
exactly.
try to communicate. Like if I say the word parrot, it helps Trick to understand what I'm thinking about, but he's not really thinking about exactly the same thing. But by creating sounds and symbols, it helps me to communicate. But the idea is the truth. The idea is what really exists.
Yeah, because there is an idea that we all have of God or the universe or free will. What any word that can be used, there's something in our brain that we picture when someone says that word, and so I think that I tend to agree kind of with what Mitch was trying to present earlier, in that we use different words for different ideas.
Yeah, and sometimes we use the same word for 3 or 4 different ideas, and when we have an ambiguous word. So
I hate those
that's
kind
the
of
problem we
words.
have here. What's happening here is we're using words ambiguously. So um, George has this definition of God, and if God is defined as the universe, then I don't think me or Mitch would say that God doesn't exist. That God exists as
Right.
defined.
If you say Santa Claus is the universe, then Santa
Right.
Claus exists.
Yeah, exactly. So
Because that's the
depending on
word.
how we define the word, anything can exist if we define it into existence. What we have a problem with is when the bulk of the world population has these other bizarre conceptions that cause problems, that we want to say, okay, well that idea isn't valid. It's not a good definition. It's a contradiction. It has no evidence, and so on. But to say that this other idea using the exact same word that they use, it creates like a confusion. And then that's why we don't align with compatibilism, because a lot of compatibilists, they want to redefine free will into this idea that is more coherent and logically coherent, and it makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of
But
an interesting thing because here's the way I would like to explain it is that because we are just using words and it's really about the ideas behind those words. Like I can't tell George that he's right or wrong. Like I can't say that George is right about the universe being God and I can't say he's wrong because God is just a word. Universe is just a word.
Exactly.
And I think we also need to remember that God yeah, God bless you. Anyway, we can agree that.
Sorry about that. I didn't activate the thing fast enough.
Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. That was the universe
That's
sneak.
why you heard it and cut off.
Yeah.
so
Okay, anyway, see, I got distracted. But I think, guys, we can all agree that God is an ambiguous word because it's not just about George's idea versus the Christian idea. We've got the Muslim idea of God, the Jewish idea of God, the different so-called Hindu gods. Each culture, each religion, even each individual has a different understanding of the word God.
But
Whereas
Chandler, we could use that same argument for the universe. Did it evolve from a Big Bang? Is it steady state? Is it like, fundamentally quantumly indeterministic, or is it deterministic? There are so many different conceptions, so many theories of the universe, just like there are so many theories of like God's existence. But like what I'm
yeah,
like,
but those
Some don't
hold on,
theories.
even think
hold
that the
on,
Big
hold
Bang
on.
happened, do they?
What I'm presenting is not all these collection of theories of both God and the universe. It's the most fundamental. In other words, like that's why we started with, what were people saying when they came up with the idea of God? Why did they come up with it? Why did people come up with the idea of the universe? So like there are fundamental, essential meanings and reasons for why the word, the concept God existed, just the same as there are fundamental reasons and explanations for what the universe is.
well, here's the deal. How do you know what's fundamental or not?
Logic.
Well, how,
And mathematics.
what if,
That's
what if,
fundamental as well, right, George?
yeah. Well, here's the deal. What if people use their logic and come to different conclusions about what's fundamental and what constitutes a god or not?
Well, that's what we're struggling with so many people who believe in free will. Their logic is faulty. I mean, there's correct logic, there's incorrect logic.
Yeah.
However, how can we say that the logic is correct or incorrect when we're talking about words that actually don't have any meaning, but only the ideas behind them, which we cannot never see someone else's ideas?
That's why we have words that with accepted definitions.
Yeah, and therein lies the problem, George, because what it means is that the minority is always wrong and the majority is always right. That's the
No,
problem.
no,
Because
but that's in
accepted
politics.
definition. See, that's the problem. Is some people accept a definition, others don't, and it ends up becoming a mob rule. Majority wins, and they set what the word means.
Well, Chandler, like for example, like consider evolution. Okay, Darwin's right about evolution. He was right when he was the first person, the only person who understood it, or just one of a few. And he's also right when the majority ultimately will accept it. So, like science, logic, truth is not determined by popularity. The acceptance of it is, but not its essential validity.
Yeah, but if
George,
everybody defined the word evolution as the same way a creationist would say, like if they define evolution as being created by a god, then that that word evolution would be problematic at that point.
Well,
Even
evolution
if
doesn't deal with it.
even if Darwin defined it as his process, if everyone else afterward defined it a different way and said, "Oh, well, evolution is creationism equals creationism. It's the same thing. The evolution is creationism." Then we would say, "No, that that definition of evolution, it doesn't exist. Evolution doesn't exist in that sense. We have to use a different word, obviously." we'd probably make up a different word to apply to Darwin's theory at that point. If
Right.
everyone,
But when you consider like the definitions of God and universe, that doesn't apply because God defined as what controls everything, and the universe is laws of nature, and God defined as being everywhere, and the universe being everything. These are like completely correlate. They're synonymous.
but that's only like one part of it. So if everyone else defines it with that plus all these other additives, then you have a problem.
Right, but that's then for example, like with the conception of our universe, yeah, in the 1800s, 1900s, they didn't have it so accurate. So like now, fine, but that doesn't mean the universe didn't exist. So yeah, some people don't understand the actual nature of God completely, but they get most of it right.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, yeah.
here's the deal, George. What if
Ah,
somebody has
George.
What if they have an
Sorry.
idea of God that is not in control of everything? What if that's not part of their definition and they believe in a God that doesn't control anything?
Well, that's like the straw man definition, or a compatibilist definition of free will. It's like it's a straw man. It's not, it's a mistaken definition. It's like if you define a table as something that flies around, like it has propellers, it's a mistaken definition.
George,
Yeah.
don't you think? I don't know why you keep making these comparisons to free will. Do you not notice this glaring problem here? The
Yeah,
compatibilists,
because
the main thing compatibilists do is they want to keep a term around that we, as people who refute free will and say reject it, we say, no, it's impossible. Deterministic universe, indeterministic universe, quasi-deterministic, probabilistic universe, random, whatever. Whatever you want to say doesn't make any sense. No one controls anything. Okay, there's no such thing as control. There's no free will, there's no control. Everything is just affected by everything else. What
Yeah.
compatibilists
No
want to
control
do
nature,
is
do we?
play
So,
around with this definition and say we don't have this, but we have that.
yeah.
This is what you were doing with the term God. You were saying, look, let's keep this word around. Let's play around with the definition. You guys just have the definition wrong. This is the most direct comparison to what compatibilists do. Yet somehow you keep turning it on its head as if we're the ones speaking like compatibilists by not being down with this idea of calling the universe God or conscious.
Yeah, because fundamentally, compatibilists have a definition of free will that's categorically different than ours. Whereas in like the exploration of whether God exists or not, if we define God as the universe, they are synonymous.
Yeah,
These are different
Yeah,
George.
if we
examples.
define God as the universe. But there's no reason for anyone to do that. George,
Chandler, we've spent like over an hour. The reason is logic. If we're defining God as what controls everything, and we're defining the universe as what controls everything, how can we
What do you
not?
mean by control, George? How can
Mitch
what
and
is
Trick
what
already
is
explained
control?
this, George.
hey,
There is no
George,
control.
man,
So there's
yeah,
nothing
the
in control.
universe is controlling
Chandler,
everything.
Chandler,
Like I
basically,
said, it's an asshole that.
guys, control, okay? If we take it back to the absurdly illogical eternal past, I mean, like, where logic can't, hold, then fine, then nothing's controlling anything, whatever. But if we start with science, if we want to bring science into it and say that the beginning of our known universe is the Big Bang, whatever created the Big Bang is what controls everything.
And would that be considered God?
Of course,
No, the thing that created the Big Bang would be
yes.
considered God.
And black
So,
holes and gamma ray bursts that can kill us.
so,
Yes.
so, so if we have, say, a multiverse theory where our universe happened via other universes, say a black hole or something like that, then that other universe is God and not ours, or
Well, then we pull back. So then we ask ourselves, what created that universe or that
well,
whatever?
but then we have the problem of the infinite regress or the acausal event, which you can't say an infinite regress is God or an acausal event is God.
Well, then the other aspect of it is like, so control is one fundamental attribute of both God and the universe. The other, I think, perhaps more irrefutable attribute is that God is everywhere and the universe is everything. I mean, that you can't refute that.
Yeah, but there's some things that we can observe in nature. God has not proven. Like, for example, time. We can observe, duration, like changes in the universe, and the effects that gravity has on the fabric of the universe. We can't
Yeah.
observe God because God is not proven. It
Well,
just
but Jamie, that's like saying that we can't hold the universe to be everywhere because we haven't seen everything.
Yeah,
I think that's the definition of a universe.
No, George, that's illogical. The universe is a word. It's a word that we use to describe everything. We're not trying to match two things. It's not as if there's something that exists and we're trying to match two different things. We're trying to match this reality to this idea of universe. That's not what's happening. Universe is a word. The word refers to everything that exists.
including the
Yes,
fourth
the
dimension, which is
It's a
universe is
word.
a word that describes
No,
everything.
no, it's not a word that describes everything. The universe is a word that means, literally, everything that exists. It's the word we use when we want to talk about everything that exists.
So what's your
right.
point?
My point
There's
is you're
also
adding an extra. For
Okay.
example, I wanted to ask you this question actually. Is the universe just the stuff in the universe, or is it more?
The universe is the stuff in the universe. I mean, that's the universe and the stuff in the universe. Everything and everything within everything is synonymous.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is the universe is a word. It's a word that means all the stuff. There's nothing extra. That's it. That's all universe means. Universe just means all the stuff.
Hmm.
The same way.
Means everything,
For
basically.
example, George, you
Well,
know
I
the
think there's a
word group.
multiverse, but that's a
Like
different story.
you know the word group. The
Same
word
here.
just what does the word group mean? Does it make sense to say group is intelligent? No, group is just a word. Group is a word that we use to describe a collection of items. So is universe. Universe is a word just like group, but universe is a special group. It's this group that means the collection of all items. Does it make sense to say group is intelligent or group is conscious? It's like,
Yes, it does.
no, it doesn't, because group, that word, just means a collection of items.
Not just a collection, the collection.
What do you mean the collection? So I'm
If you're
no, that's
applying it to universe, it's not just a collection. It's
no, I'm
the
just talking
only
about the word
collection.
group. So
It's
one
the
word at
only
a time.
collection. You're relating it to universe.
Well, the word group, one step at a time. Group, just group. Can the word group? Does it make sense to say group is conscious? So group is just a word we use. I want to describe something. It's not just one banana, two. I want to talk about all three bananas. Group. Can group be red? Can group be deaf?
Yes.
All right. We had a nice conversation. I think I have to leave. It's getting a little bit late. It's about 9 o'clock. It's been a pleasure, though. Nice talking to you guys.
You
Haven't
too,
seen
man.
you in a time. I'll update you with the project and everything.
Yeah, and I
Hard's
Sounds
need
good.
to,
leaving,
I need to
so
go to bed soon too.
Yeah, George, sorry Scepter held you up last week. Oh, Master Transit Authority,
so
whatever.
my mic was
Oh
okay. Did it
yeah,
cut
that was
off?
a thunderstorm, guys.
What?
That was the wrath of God.
Did I cut out? Did I cut off a lot today? No. Yes. I don't know.
Not too.
No, you weren't bad at all, actually.
Well, I'm doing
Yeah.
something differently. I have a feeling it's the mic because I have it like in a different position.
Ah,
Uh, I just want to, even though emotions seem to go a little bit high, I just want you to know that I'm completely cool with this. I'm actually satisfied in how we've closed things because we've sort of reached an impasse. And I think people who are able to follow the difference of opinion we had will benefit from it. So,
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting because it seems like I'm more confused than I was when we started. But like it seems to me like someone saying that we should say that a sphere is synonymous with a cube. It just seems like
Chandler, how are you getting that?
because
All right,
the
see you
idea
guys.
of
Bye.
God
All right, see
that
you,
I've
Mitch.
always had, that I was
All right.
always taught from the Bible and what everyone has taught me, is not in any way the same as the universe.
Chandler, the God that you were taught is like the creator. The God you were taught is what controls everything. That was your fundamental letter. Was like when you were taught about God, that was probably the first concept or attribute of God you were taught.
No,
Yep.
actually, it's actually that God does not control everything because humans have free will, see?
Yeah, but still, no. If you were addressing God, you know the way you weren't taught God with relation to the concept of free will, because that would like you would have never understood it. In other words, when you were introduced to the concept of God, you were introduced to this idea of what controls everything.
No, see that's the whole deal. There is a lot. It's all conglomerated into this weird thing. The religion of Christianity is all conglomerated, and that God is mad at humans for disobeying Him. He can't control His creation. They're too powerful.
Yeah, even though he gave it free will.
Yeah, it's weird. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And that's why I tend to agree with Trick and Mitch. I just don't like to use the word God because it brings up the whole hell thing. It brings up this God
Heaven.
likes the Jews more than other nations or something, or weird stuff, racism and sexism. God hates women. The Bible makes that pretty clear, you know.
Yep.
Again, like the concept of God spans way beyond the Bible. I mean, you go to Hinduism, whatever. But again, if we're going to fundamental attributes, you know, God is what controls everything. The universe's laws of nature will control everything. I mean, that's what the challenge is, Chandler. I mean, the rest of it, fine. I'm conceding that a lot of aspects of religion are mistaken, but we're just focused on, God as it's defined in the Bible, whether God exists, and
It's as
if
Trick Slattery said one time, you're attributing consciousness to things that don't have the properties to have
but
consciousness.
I don't need consciousness. In other words, like the laws of nature control everything. And so we don't invoke consciousness in that definition of control, that other understanding. So I use
But
that same understanding to say God exists.
Right. Well, for me, yeah, the whole notion of consciousness is an important part of the definition of the word God. Like I don't think you can have the definition of the word God without some kind of consciousness within it. So that's the problem I see. I think even when we go back to the history of the word God, I think most people's conceptions of the word God means that there's some kind of consciousness in there
Right. But
somewhere.
if we define consciousness as awareness, like if God is controlling us, making us do stuff and all, how can God be making us do anything if God isn't aware of us?
Because it's just a causal process. It's just a process of physics.
All right, but no, all right, it's just a process of physics. Let me think.
Like
Okay,
like 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 if you a slinky going down a staircase isn't aware that it's going down a staircase. It's just going down a staircase.
okay, gravity. You have two particles, right?
Yes.
Um, Gravity is a manifestation of those particles, quote unquote, awareness of each other. In other words, like they're interacting through this force called gravity. If there was no awareness, if like one particle wasn't, quote unquote, aware of the other, or if gravity wasn't aware of both particles, there could be no interaction.
It's not awareness. It's just physics. It's just whether it's a curving of space time or something like that creates the attraction effect, basically.
yeah,
Right.
anything
And,
when
and again, yeah, so fundamentally, I agree with you that it would um, translate into kind of like a semantic definition of what awareness is.
Hey
Yeah. So
guys,
so
I
when I
really gotta go.
Yeah, so do I actually.
So I need to close this episode. I mean, I feel like I'm not fully satisfied with.
No, this will be an ongoing discussion that we kind of have because it's an interesting discussion, and I think a lot of it has to do with definitions and just how we define things and why we define things the way we define things and things like that. So it's more to do with that than anything, I think. So, but yeah, I think we should close it up here and just leave it at that at this point.
Yeah,
Sounds good. Yep.
yeah. Okay, you've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion, and a bunch of co-hosts. We've been talking about God and the universe, and it gets into about definitions and how we define God and how we define universe, and it gets a little bit confusing, and this will definitely be an ongoing discussion because it gets into the most important nature of how we use words, why we use words, and the idea behind those words. And so it's absolutely worth talking about, and I hope eventually we reach agreement, but it's exciting even if we don't. And it's very educational, and we understand each other better. So we'll do this in the future. Anyway, thank you for listening to this episode. We'll be back for more, so stay tuned. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.